Hi, this is Roger Green, executive producer and host of the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are bringing you 6 conversations from episode 6, our Friday conversation with global KOLs about the impact of the Rezdiffra approval on Thursday. This conversation centers around the tools and education it will take for the health system to find the right patients for Rezdiffra. In terms of education, Zobair asks what is practical. He starts his answer by pointing out that most early patients will be found in GI practices. Hepatologists and their advanced providers have knowledge of the disease and probably know enough about the drug to know what to do now. But many, maybe even most of the target patients are being treated in gastroenterology practices. For 2024, he says, educating these gastroenterologists and their advanced providers must be the focus of education. Beyond that, he says, the specialty organizations, endocrinology, primary care, diabetology, are on board, but their members will need education as well downstream. Jeff McIntyre agrees strongly with Zobair's assessment, but asks the pivotal follow-up question, education to what point or outcome? As he points out, the next step needs to be education not only about how to use the drug, but how to identify the patients. This speaks to what gastroenterologists need to learn, and, more striking, the importance of educating patients to advocate for themselves and identify their own disease. After Jeff makes that comment, others note the importance of patients as well. Bjorn Schattenberg shifts slightly to state that Rezdiffra's safety profile is a critical benefit. It alleviates some concern that a well-meaning provider might prescribe for a patient with compensated cirrhosis because today the tests aren't precise enough for us to know exactly who has what. Building on that, I note that the excellent Rezdiffra safety profile can resolve a dilemma physicians have with most first-in-class drugs. How to do no harm while getting the right drug to the right patient. The safety profile makes the dilemma less profound because the consequences might be lower, although no less important to keep in mind. Finally, returning to education, Laurent Cassera closes this conversation by noting that he works at a liver clinic inside a diabetes clinic, as he puts it, and that the diabetes screening protocol, annual fiber scan for every patient with suspected advanced liver disease, followed by referral to a hepatologist, is working well. The approval of a first drug indicated for MASH may be the most significant achievement in fatty liver disease in longer than anyone can remember, certainly since some of the major diagnostic decisions and assessments were made. The conversation is interesting, and our global leaders have a variety of perspectives, so sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the conversation in our LinkedIn discussion group.
Zobair Younossi.
In the United States, the majority of patients initially would be in the GI practices, and of course some hepatology, but primarily in the GI practices. They're waiting for something, so they have to actually be accessed. So these will be in phases. The education stuff that we're going to do would be in phases. I think as much as we can do in terms of patient education should parallel any phases on the provider side. But on the provider side, initially it has to be on the gastroenterology and their APP side. That's where they need help. That's what hepatologists understand. Resmetirom and indication. We're all on board and we can treat, and our APPs are pretty much on board. It's going to be the gastroenterologist. I'm afraid if I go now and start pushing the primary care physicians to start screening, I don't even have the capacity to treat the patients that could potentially come, or evaluate them and risk stratify them using one of the algorithms to get them to treatment, because it's going to be limitation of what we have in terms of capacity of hepatology in the United States. So I think this year, 2024, would be focus on the gastroenterologists and develop the material that then you can use to convince the primary care physicians. The endocrinologists are increasingly on board. In the United States, ACE, which is American Association for Clinical Endocrinology, has a guidance document, a guideline that's been around, and they're on board. ADA is writing one right now. I'm a member of the committee, and it's going to come out pretty soon. And then you have the European Diabetes sort of Society that Michael Roden and Amelia Gastilli and others are actually putting together. So that would probably be a little bit sort of later during the year and at the beginning of next year. But I think we need to sort of learn from these educational programs, make it stepwise so that it's effective and targeted, but also doesn't overwhelm us as the practitioners and providers otherwise we will shoot ourselves in the leg. We're making sure that Madrigal could produce the drugs that we want and enough of the drug that we want. And all of those things need some more time to be gelled. And I'm actually focusing in the next 6 months to develop educational sort of programs for the gastroenterologists. And as Joran and Laurent is our co-chair of the committee for the NIT, for the Global NASH Council, they are actually going to be involved. And, there are discrepancies still in terms of what second test do you have to use? Some of it is because of sort of guidelines looking a different way at the same evidence. Some of it is reality of what you have available. If you don't have alpha available, you can put it 50,000 times on the second line test. It won't be used. So let's go to the reality of what's available in, country X or region Y of the United States. And if they have shear wave that's more available, then it should be shear wave. I think we have to make it available so that we don't actually create barriers based on slight bit of difference in terms of evidence. We have to use the best evidence, but also be practical, as Laurent said, what is available and use that is available, even if it may not be the perfect test.
Jeff McIntyre.
If I may say, I completely agree with Dr. Younossi on that as well. I think it begs a question of, when we talk about education, it's education to what point, to what outcome? And we can educate about non-invasives, we can educate, we need to educate about the liver and NASH and, all these sort of things as well. But I don't know that that is the next step in this. And so there's a fine line here between our next step needing to be education, but our next step also needs to be identification of patients. And so to Dr. Younossi's comments, we need to be able to identify the patients that are already in the system, and then to be able to work with the gastroenterologist to be able to make sure that they're aware of the medication that the patients already in the system can receive. And so that speaks then to education of the gastroenterologist. It speaks to the education of the patients that are already diagnosed and already in the system. And we know this is underdiagnosed. And so there needs to be a ramp up of diagnosing those folks that have NASH that aren't aware of it right now. But I think it also then very quickly goes into the reimbursement question about that as well, of being able to educate payers on this also.
Jörn Schattenberg.
Yeah, the good part about that is that through all the trials, and even now in the label, resmetirom has been a very safe drug. There's been no major concerns. In the presentation of the label yesterday, there's some hints regarding looking out for gallbladders and decompensated cirrhosis, gallbladder stones, and so on. But it seemed very safe. And while I share Zobair's concern that if you're outside of an expert's hand, there might be more use that's more lax, I think it's very important we tell people to not use it, in particular decompensated cirrhosis and cirrhosis at all. Then the label doesn't sound very complicated. I think it's manageable.
Just to follow up, I actually agree completely with you, Jörn. It seems to me that is a very, very safe drug. In the clinical trial, when you have gallstone, it's a gallstone because these patients are at risk for gallstone because they are obese. So it may not even actually be related, but it's been reported. So I think making the point that drug is generally very safe. We presented data about quality of life on a phase 2 of this drug. There was improvement of quality of life of patients who were responding. When you go from efficacy to effectiveness, you go to the real world setting. I err on the side of being more cautious, not to worry about any side effects, but just to understand how people are going to use it in the real world, because not all of the practitioners will be that careful. And I don't want to have a situation where our first drug in this field get a black eye because somebody did not actually understand that you can't use it with a drug that can involve the CYP pathways of enzymes that could potentially worsen toxicity. So I think we just have to be careful, and that's the reason that my first push is for F2s and F3s. That's in there. But I'm comforted with the fact that, in my estimation, there were some concerns, and I saw the report about maybe the thyroid issue. There is no evidence that this is a completely different. My close friend wrote an editorial in one of the major journals, but I love him. But I think the reality is that there is so much data right now that the drug has great safety profile, and some of the things that you see is part of the clinical trial scrutiny. Now, of course, any drug can cause toxicity. Obviously, you can take drug over the counter and can harm yourself. But I think in general and total, it's a safe drug. I'm erring on the side of safety for now until I have more effectiveness data to say that. And there's more evidence on more advanced patients. Hopefully, that'll come at some point. That could be expanded. So I share your enthusiasm, Jörn. I'm as enthusiastic as you are.
Roger Green.
Laurent, let me try to tie a couple things together, and then I'm going to ask all of you to respond to what I'm saying, and then I got one or two more questions. There's this interesting dynamic at play here. The dynamic goes like this. We don't want to give this drug to cirrhotic patients. We want to do only F2s and F3s, but we have a very hard time figuring out where the border is between F3 and compensated cirrhosis. Laurent, that was in the conversation before you got here, but it was a concern that both Jörn and Ian voiced. At that point, the safety of the drug becomes pivotal because it suggests you can miss by a little, right? You can go into early child's PUA and you're probably okay. You're not going to lose patients that that way, which doesn't mean we should be more casual about that, Zobair. I think you're right, F2, F3. But it doesn't make it quite so scary that you be so precise at a point in time when the precision of the tools isn't that good. And I think that, to me, that was probably the major benefit of how strong the safety profile was on this drug, or is on this drug. Laurent, I didn't mean to jump in front of you. Go ahead, and then I got one more question for everybody.
Laurent Castera.
No, I just wanted to echo what Zobair said. I mean, this is a general rule for phase 3 study. How can you extrapolate this result to real world? And you just have to be aware that the data we have are in a super selected population that may not be completely representative of patients that will be seen in the real world. But this is always the same. When the drugs come to the market, it always happens. On the other hand, I think we're pretty confident that, it's safe in compensated cirrhosis. It's easy to use. Side effects are mild. Of course, you might end up when you treat 10,000 patients to toxicity or DDI or whatever. But I'm pretty confident also, like Zobair mentioned. There will be also the same process for using NIT, because most of the literature and the evidence we have regarding NIT comes from expert centers like ours. And we need now to go beyond the liver clinic. And this will be a learning process and interesting to see how this NIT perform in a larger scale or in other settings like in endocrinology or in the diabetes clinic. But from my experience now working for 5 years, having a liver clinic in the diabetes clinic, our colleagues really adopted this method, and then now they're using it. They perform a fiber scan to every diabetic patient once a year. Every time they suspect there is already advanced liver disease, they refer to us, and it works very well. And I think this will be the way to go, because the low-hanging fruit also for patients are patients in the endocrinology clinic. But there will be a lot of education ahead, and I completely agree. We are aligned with Zobair because this is something we've been working on now for a while. It's very important to provide good education. And you need to have a frame when using, of course, this drug.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. We'll be back Wednesday night with a group of patient advocates discussing their excitement, reaction, and next steps after the approval of Rezdiffra. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.